Follower, and indeed the entire chamber, I welcome you to this event. Today we have two top distinguished professionals on the panel. We shall be looking at the theme, managing private equity, entrepreneur relationship, the key imperatives. On the panel today is Dr. Oke Enelama, former Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. We also have Mrs. Bisi Lamikora, former partner, KPMG, Nigeria. I promise you we'll have an exciting time today. Shall we observe the national anthems of Nigeria and Britain? Thank you. Once again, I welcome you very warmly. Permit me to share a few of the webinar guidelines with you. If you have comments, kindly use the chat icon. However, all questions should be sent in via the Q&A icon. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome our President and Chairman of Council, Mr. Kayode Falowo, to deliver his welcome address. Mr. Falowo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Aki Oshutoki, the chairman of our programs committee. Good afternoon, patrons of the NBCC, council members, and members of our distinguished Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce. I am delighted to welcome all of you to today's event themed Managing Private Equity, Entrepreneurial Relationship, the key imperatives, which has been organized by our programs committee today. As some of you will know, the NBCC is the foremost bilateral chamber in Nigeria and was established in 1977 to promote trade and investment between Nigeria and Britain. We have over 350 members made up of top corporate organizations in Nigeria and the United Kingdom. The NBCC is affiliated with the British Chambers of Commerce, which gives our members access to a network of 53 chambers across the United Kingdom and 66 other affiliates worldwide. The chamber is currently developing a 4-story plaza at Lekki in Lagos to house our secretariat and several other facilities. Some of these facilities will include a business incubation center, which will help people who are starting business or want to learn about new ways of doing things. For instance, some businesses that may require private equity investment but do not know how to go about it will benefit from that center. It will also include a British Trade Center, a seminar hall, a training center, a library, members' lounge, various meeting rooms, and so many other facilities. When completed, the NBCC will have made history as the first bilateral chamber of commerce in Nigeria to have such a facility. I therefore have the pleasure of using today's occasion to invite those who would like to partner with us in this initiative to indicate so through our secretariat or through the chat box. Before proceeding to today's event, let me share some statistics on the private equity market with this group of esteemed participants. According to the Global Private Equity Market Review 2020, published by McKinsey & Co., the total AUM, that is asset under management, of the private equity market as at 2019 is estimated to be $3.9 trillion, with North America, Europe, and Asia accounting for 49%, 18.3%, and 28.4% of the market, respectively, while the rest of the world represents a mere 4.2%. By the way, this statistic is 2019. As you know, some say 2020 is a year that nobody really will be able to put their fingers on in terms of figures, statistics, and indeed history. So please pardon me. We have some dated figures here. The total value of global PE fundraising for the year 2019 amounted to $553 billion, with North America having $350 billion, that is 63%, Europe, $99 billion, 17.8%, Asia, $94 billion, that is 16.9%, and the rest of the world only being able to attract $12 billion, which is 2.1%. A report published by the Africa Private Equity and Venture Capital Association further revealed that the total value of PE fundraising in Africa amounted to $3.8 billion during that year. Of course, with these statistics, we can see that there's a great disparity in the private equity market between Africa and the rest of the world. This may be due to the general economic problems attributable to most African nations, such as political/economic instability, currency fluctuations, insecurity, and lack of adequate infrastructure. Furthermore, the African private equity market full-year review reveals that between 2014 and 2019, a total of 1,053 deals valued at $25.4 billion was reported in Africa, with funding cutting across various sectors such as agriculture, healthcare, ICT, financials, and renewable energy. An amount of 6.6 billion, representing 26% of these deals, originated in West Africa, with Nigeria accounting for 68%, that is 4.4 billion, of the total value of the deals in West Africa, thereby making Nigeria one of the attractive destinations for private equity investments in Africa. This is partly attributable to the fact that it is home to Africa's largest population. And the major PE firms in the country include Africa Capital Alliance, an early investor in MTN and many companies, Verod Capital, who recently announced the merger between Tangerine Life and ARM Life, and Sahel Capital, a major investor in agriculture. This being said, the limited awareness and understanding about funding on the part of entrepreneurs in the country has slowed the development in this sector. Furthermore, a major impediment to development of equity finance for young businesses is the lack of investor-ready company. That's a major problem for most PE firms. The money sometimes is on the table, but there is no investor-ready company available. I'm sure maybe will speak to that today. At the NBCC, we believe that private equity has a significant role to play in driving economic growth by generating returns for investors and building better businesses through creation of real value that goes beyond just equity. However, more needs to be done to prepare entrepreneurs in terms of understanding the financing needs at different stages of the business cycle, meeting investor requirements, and managing the investor relationship. Given the foregoing, I'm delighted to welcome today's keynote speaker, Dr. Oke Enelama, Chairman, African Capital Alliance, who is the chairman, which is a leading independent investment management firm in Nigeria. And it has sponsored many funds and is managing several investments across a variety of sectors in sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Enelama served as the Federal Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment in Nigeria from November 2015 to May 2019. Prior to his appointment to government, Mr. Enelama worked as the CEO of ACA. Okay, on behalf of MBCC and indeed Nigeria, we want to thank you for the great job you did as the Federal Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. Watching you in that role convinced me, as I'm sure a lot of people are also convinced, that it is easy for private sector people to actually help catalyze the kind of development that we look forward to having in Nigeria. Dr. Enelama's previous private equity experience was gained from Zavia Management in New York and Johannesburg. Prior to his career in private equity, Oke worked for Arthur Andersen in Nigeria and London, and Goldman Sachs in New York and London. After qualifying as a medical doctor, Dr. Enelama transitioned to a business career and qualified as a chartered accountant in Nigeria. He holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School and is a chartered financial analyst. Our moderator for this webinar is Mrs. Bisi Lamikonra, former partner and head advisory services, KPMG Nigeria. Bisi led the advisory team of partners in the African region and the financial services industry leadership team across Africa. She has provided advisory services for various public and private sector clients within Nigeria, Africa, and globally. She has over 36 years of experience that spans various industries and sectors of the economy, including financial services, consumer/industrial markets, manufacturing, energy, natural resources, technology, and government. Mrs. Lamikonra has assisted various industry regulators and clients on turnaround projects to reposition them on the path of sustainable growth and profitability, and has also facilitated and presented papers on topical banking and financial and other issues at several fora. This is set up the KPMG Network for Women in Nigeria and has been supportive of professional women in and outside KPMG. She led the relaunch and is the co-chair of Women Corporate Directors, a global organization in Nigeria. BC has also been involved in several programs focused on entrepreneurship. She has served on the board of the Enterprise Development Center, EDC, of the Pan-African University, and led the study of MSME sector for Faith Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you for attention, but before leaving, I have the pleasure to invite today's speaker, Dr. Oke Enelama, to give his presentation. Thank you very much again for joining us today. Okay, please give your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our distinguished chairman. So first, let me thank the chairman and the members of the council and all the other members of the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce, as well as all the attendees today, as well as our moderator, BC, and everybody that has played one role or the other in convening this meeting. I am delighted and very happy to be part of this forum. I certainly think this type of dialogue is not only topical, but highly relevant. So with your permission, I'll share my slides. I have a presentation I want to make to use to share what I have for us today, and then we'll go into the Q&A at the right time. I trust that you can see my screen. I've just started sharing my slides, and I'm going to be taking us through a few slides on this theme of managing the private equity entrepreneur relationship, the key imperatives. And the basic outline for my presentation or discussion with us today will be, I'll set the context, I'll deal with some of the motivations from the point of view of the entrepreneur and some of the principles for successive partnerships. And then we'll look at some case studies at the end before we open it up. Just by way of background, talking about African Capital Alliance, which I was a co-founder of more than 20 years ago, I think the point to make is that, like, we've had very good experience, particularly investing in Nigeria since 1998. So we invested in over 45 companies, and that experience has spanned over 20 years. And I make that point just to emphasize that, like, there is some body of experience that has built up that one can rely on to reach some of the conclusions that I'll share with us today. Our distinguished chairman has shared some of the statistics. I think the only thing I'll add is that I have probably more recent figures. I mean, she talked about the assets under management at 3.5 trillion. You can see that it has almost doubled to 6.5 trillion by 2021. And the number of deals, just dealing with buyouts alone, is over 3,000, and the numbers go on. But what's even more important is the principles that have underpinned this global success or global success story. And it's really the principles of partnership and collaboration. The fact that, for something you have to create win-win partnerships if this is going to work. And this is also has created a lot of wealth over the long term for many stakeholders, not just the investors, but the entrepreneurs and their backers, right? And they all have backers, both the investors and the entrepreneurs. And we'll talk about some of that later. And if you then deal with what's the overarching principle that underpins all this, it's alignment of interest. This is the same principle that underpins marriages. BC and I were colleagues way back in Arthur Anderson in those days. And I remember Dick Kramer used to talk about how the principles of marriage in the home apply to principles of partnership in the office. That, this, when you get a partnership right, it's win-win. And that's really what this is all about. And then the context in which this is happening is that you have to have strong corporate governance. You have to have, a set of checks and balances and how people operate that protects the investors and protects all the other stakeholders. And of course, the evidence then that you want to see is good results or strong results coming through and delivering on the commitments that have been made to various stakeholders, whether it's profit or even on the social side. When you come down to Africa, Africa also was, although somewhat a latecomer to the field of private equity or even alternative assets, broadly speaking, but there is no doubt that Africa has picked up and has become an interesting region, just in terms of what has been done on the continent. And I think as this slide shows, there is activity across the region. The distribution of private equity investments that have been made or deals that have been done between 2014 and 2019, cuts across. Although I would say West Africa, which is our own region, actually is arguably the strongest region. And that's because of Nigeria, because Nigeria is obviously the biggest economy. And we've also been a very ripe market for private equity in Africa. But the chairman covered some of this, so I won't go through the stats again, just to make the point that like Africa has picked up. Let me deal with some of the impact that we've had in terms of private equity as a sector, working with our partners. The thing about private equity as an industry is that like everything it does is underpinned by the principle of partnership. And the impact comes through the investments and therefore the investees or the companies in which we are invested. And if you look at some of the development impacts, particularly in terms of social, the sustainable development goals of the UN or so on, you see that we've created jobs, and this is just linked with Capital Alliance, by the way. And these numbers are by no means, it's just it's a microcosm. It's a small part of a much bigger picture, which I don't have the stats readily, which is why I said, let me share ours. We know we've created over 20,000 jobs directly and indirectly and livelihoods. And of course, in this era when it's so important, I think earlier this week we were celebrating, or maybe last week we were celebrating the International Day for Women. This gender diversity and what it brings to the workplace is very important. And then of course, financial inclusion as well has been an area of great impact and where we continue to see capital flowing in. Let me spend a few moments and talk about how the private equity model actually works, or how the private equity fund managers generate returns for their investors. I think there are three things that you have to do right. One is the entry, just finding the right companies to back. When the chairman was speaking, he made the point that, just having companies that are ready for investment can be a challenge in itself. I would say that at times we go even further to, work with companies to get them ready. But it would help a lot if there was a whole system. I mean, firms like KPMG, where BC used to work, play a very important role. Law firms, accounting firms, and other advisory firms, consulting firms, strategy firms play a big role in getting companies ready. And of course, boards play a big role as well, and all the other people who support entrepreneurs as they launch their businesses. But once you find the right businesses, you also have to negotiate at the point of entry to make sure you're buying right. And then the real game changer is the value add, the ability to take the company from one level to the next. And of course, all that would not be sufficient if we are not able to exit or to sell the business or to get the returns back to the investors who provide the funding. That's why you see that all this is underpinned by this alignment of interest principle, which I covered earlier. And I'm sure there'll be questions to address, but let me just go on in the interest of time. That then leads me to just share a bit on how the private equity model works from point of view of investors, right? The people who are giving money to invest. Investors are generally a partnership. The terms we use for them is limited partners, which means that like they give money and there's a general partner who is typically the fund manager managing the fund or the pool of funds. And that then the investors frequently will serve on an advisory board, and increasingly that advisory board is becoming more and more like, frankly, an active board, although it's not the same as your corporate board. But because of the need for oversight, we're finding that advisory boards are becoming more and more active. There is also typically an investment committee that oversees the investments, that approves the investments, because the core business of a private equity firm or a private equity fund is investment making. And not surprising, just like a bank will have a strong credit committee, a private equity fund will have a strong investment committee that at times will include outside members, and of course the fund manager. And then you invest across a portfolio of companies, and all this is to make the point that this is a well-traveled road. It's a defined model that has worked successfully, which is why we started from the outside in the global industry. And let me now talk about the entrepreneurs, just from the point of view of the entrepreneurs or those that are needing the capital. What's in it for entrepreneurs? Why do entrepreneurs seek capital from private equity funds or VC funds, venture capital funds? One is access to patient capital. You will find that borrowings and other forms of capital that are not tailored to backing businesses will fall short when you're trying to build a business for the long term and build it to sustainability. Of course, the flip side of that is that the entrepreneurs also need to know that although this is patient capital, it does require a return. The typical private equity fund has a 10-year life, or let me say 8 to 12-year life. Investments tend to be over a 5-year period so that you have enough time to make the investment and to exit the investment. And like I said, a major part of the model is value addition. And entrepreneurs typically want fund managers that or private equity funds that will complement them by adding value. So you find that like you serve on the boards with them, will bring other sort of players that we know. The typical private equity firm or institution like African Capital Alliance will have a wide-ranging network, both by reason of our backgrounds, the number of companies we back, the number of interactions you have, like the one we're having today. All these things create an atmosphere of a rich, should I call it, capital, of relationship capital and network capital, which you can bring to bear on your investee companies. And the entrepreneurs, by their very nature, will also have their own relationships, but typically they may be less than what they need, right, to reach their full potential. And of course, the firm will then partner with them to do so. And some of the catalysts for growth that private equity firms can bring also include geographic expansion, dealing with other companies you've worked with, creating a club of businesses that are, like the way they say iron sharpens iron, that can help each other. And then of course, bringing access, to other sort of things which the private equity firm may not have, but which you have by reason of either the investments you've made previously, or like I said earlier, the networks you've built. And so I want to now go back and deal with some of the principles that really make private equity a successful model, why it's been so successful around the world. I think the first thing to say is that like the key is to build trust-based relationships, that transcend the investment. You find that like when problems arise, as they inevitably would, and I use the word inevitably advisedly, meaning that like it's never really smooth sailing. I mean, if you have a relationship where you're trying to do great things, you're bound to have some issues come up. But it helps if there's a relationship and if there is trust, atmosphere where that can be discussed. We've talked about the importance of alignment of interest and the fact that this is really what fuels this model, the fact that you both win. When you have a win-lose relationship or a lose-lose relationship, that can create all kinds of problems. And the model assumes that the parties will act with integrity, meaning that like you enter into agreements, yes, but it helps even more if the parties have integrity as a value. Just like in a marriage, you assume that the partners will have integrity. When one party or both parties don't have integrity, it can spell a lot of problems. And we typically have legal agreements that are well documented, and that's critical. But it's by no means sufficient. And of course, the agreements themselves need to be robust to deal with a variety of conditions. In other words, what if the investment doesn't go well? What happens? What if the management doesn't perform? What happens? What if there are issues? What if conflicts arise? How do you deal with all that? I've talked about the importance of planning the end, have the end in mind when you're going in. Exits and liquidity are important. The private equity model is fueled by successful exits. I must say that this has actually been a challenge more recently. We started off very well, as the chairman said, but I can tell you across Africa, one of the issues that investors raise is that they want to see more liquidity, more exits, happening. And that's something that we have to accept as a challenge as, practitioners in the industry. And all this must be understood that things are happening in a context of fiduciary, of us being fiduciaries. What do I mean by that? Most of these funds come from pension funds, investors that are saving for the long term. And so when they give the money, they give it in trust with the understanding that the money will be invested wisely, judiciously, and with all the duty of care that you expect of a fiduciary, which is why you find that when things don't go well, the investors must see that the fund managers are acting in their best interest and not just walking away without trying to protect their interest. And of course, I talked about the importance of relationships area, that the relationship capital is important beyond the legal agreements, and all these things come into focus once if issues arise. Let me now close with 3 case studies. I won't go into them in detail. I just want to show that there have been successful examples I picked ABC Transport because he's an example of an entrepreneur we worked with many years ago that really impressed me. I remember sitting with Frank Neji, who was the founder of ABC Transport, or is the founder of ABC Transport. And as part of the negotiations, we were talking about under what conditions we'll fire this founder CEO. And he sat there, he had an advisor with him. He sat there and just discussed it with such maturity. I was impressed. I'm not sure I could have been that cool, calm and collected if you were talking about how you would fire me and what it would take. And by the way, that never arose because I interestingly, when you have people with that level of maturity, they also tend to do well. We had a successful outcome in that investment. We took the company public, as some of you know, and the fund did well, the company did well, and all the stakeholders did well. On an African stage, I'm sure some of us have heard of Equity Bank, which was invested by Helios in Kenya. And my understanding is that has also been a very successful investment. In fact, Lagos Business School has written case studies on Equity Bank. That's what I wanted to deal with. And the example coming from the outside in. Paystack is one that has been in the news more recently, where it's been backed by VCs at very good valuations, very handsome valuations. And the point to make again is that like this is more in the earlier stage or technology space. And the last time I was on a panel like this, I was on it with Dr. Mobola Johnson, and she's invested in that space, technology and ventures. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there has been successes across board. So there is no reason why we cannot make this work, this model work. And I hope that from the discussions we'll have today, that we'll find ways to encourage more partnerships and more successful engagement in this very important sector that has worked very well for other markets. And water doesn't run uphill in Nigeria. There's no reason why this can work well in Nigeria, particularly with the kind of players who are now interested in coming in. Thank you for listening. I hope there's more than enough time for the questions and answers. I know there will be some interlude before the question and answer, but I'm here and available. I wanted to make sure I allowed enough time for the Q&A, which is where I think really you will benefit. And I know BC will do a good job of moderating the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, I mean, I'm sure we got what we expected and more. And we will take an interlude to take the adverts by the sponsor, and then we'll come up back and kick off. I'll just kick off with a few comments, and then we kick off a question and answer. So I think
I'll just stop sharing my screen for now. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, so can we take the adverts?
5, 6, 9, yeah. 5, 6, 9. Life be not easy with your phone number. Send and receive money anywhere. 5, 6, 9. You need the code when they do wonders. Wonder go take you right there. 5, 6, 9. All you need is hope. Within they give you hope. Begin the press the code, yo. 5, 6, 9. All you need is hope. Within they give you hope. Begin the press the code, yo. 5, 6, 9.
With Hope PS Bank, open and operate your bank accounts by yourself, anywhere, anytime. No checkbook or payment card. It is all digital with *569*9#. Hope Digital app or hopepsbank.com. Hope, succeed. Hope Bank always.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, there have been compliments in the chat box about your presentation. They're very nice and very clear. And there are a number of questions. But let me kick it off, okay? You rightfully so, when you were talking about this, you used the word that Dick Kramer used about marriage, because, we always think about it as a partnership. I think using the word marriage makes it much more vivid in terms of the collaboration, in terms of the fact that as any marriage, there will be seasons, so good and bad, but that's the way we'll be guided. I think what would be useful, just to take one of the questions and guide is to say, look, you've been in this for 23 years plus, and you have done different types of investments. I think your presentation said 43, and I know some of them have worked, extremely well. Some of them have been lessons. But just in working with entrepreneurs over the years, it would be good if you just shared what are the lessons you've learned on a practical basis, and also what have you done as ACA to modify the way you manage this marriage, if I can use that word?
Thank you. I think, you know, some of the most important lessons we've learned are the ones I shared. I would say that the number one lesson for me personally, I'm sure most people in the firm and even broadly would agree, just like in marriage, like you said, BC, integrity is important. If people have integrity, and I use integrity, not just personal integrity, but professional integrity. What's the difference? I mean, maybe not a big one, but you know, even if the person is honest, they should be professional enough and competent enough to know what is right. You know, at times people are honest, but naively so. So they could have personal integrity, but lack professional integrity. The person doesn't know what he should know, and therefore he's sincerely wrong and creating all kinds of problems. So you need that integrity, both on a personal and a professional level. And then I think this idea that like one then learns from experience and you apply that experience, which means that like for us, for instance, you find that we like to be very clear on the legal agreements, and we're very painstaking in documenting things. Now, not because we plan to use the agreements, but actually you want those issues to come up nice and early, and the best time to discuss them is upfront, right? So that you document it. You know, you find that like when you've done that, when problems then arise, you know, you may not even need to refer to the legal agreement, just you then start looking at the options. But it's important to understand that like these agreements were signed and that there are fiduciaries who are relying on it, you know, for things to be processed. And we have found that like when we do that, you know, and at times we also bring in other sort of I was going to call them collaborators or people, right, to help us sort through these things, you know, if issues arise. I mean, and we had issues early in the day. I don't want to mention names because you don't always want to talk about the things that didn't go. But I remember an early case where, in fact, it took Fola Diola and Chief Shonekon, you know, just to work out an exit with this particular entrepreneur, you know, so that we both agreed to disagree. But, you know, he paid us off and we left. But that's the nature of the business. Sorry, BC, your phone is muted.
I noted I was muted.
Yes.
Thanks. There's a question for you, which is a different kind of question. So I guess we also have investors in the audience, and the investors are asking that, does ACA allow individual retail investors, or are you, you know, mostly, do you get your funding just from institutional investors?
So let me answer that question more broadly before I come to ACA. Private equity as an investment class, you know, falls under what you might call more sophisticated investments, meaning that like you find that like, you know, it's one of those areas in regulated environments where, you know, there's a lot of buyer beware, right? Because you're investing in things that initially are liquid private companies, which may be taken public and so on. And so that process means that like for most retail investors, they will go through some channel, right, to get into it. But the high net worth individuals that, you know, may have family offices or may have advisors or maybe experience themselves do invest in private equity directly. And also because of the nature of the thing and the fact that our private partnerships is not, you don't have like 1,000, you know, sort of partners. You probably will have like 20 or 30. Therefore, there is some sort of cutoff for a typical fund on how much they would typically accept in a fund. But having said all that, there are many sort of channels, right, that aggregate funds and invest in private equity. For instance, the pension funds themselves, as you know, are subsidiary investors, even though their own beneficiaries are retail investors. African Capital Alliance, we also have Value Alliance, which is our asset management arm that accepts money from retail investors, and then, you know, can decide if and to what extent it will invest in a private equity fund. So that would be my advice for somebody who is retail. But if you are retail sophisticated, please talk to us. We're always open for business.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Now, the other question is really to say, you know, is there an optimum amount or threshold? And I guess, you know, it's a threshold in terms of, in general terms, that suggests that you would have a successful outcome from a PE firm perspective and entering into a marriage with an entrepreneur. And are there particular areas that you have found that tend to be more successful?
Let me again answer, because of the importance of the meeting and the diversity of the audience, I'd like to state the principles first before I go specific. the general principle for private equity investing or even venture investing is like, yeah, you know, like BC said about marriage, you're trying to take a significant enough stake that you are actually an active partner in the relationship, right? So it's not a passive investment. It's not like somebody who is starting something and you know, has like maybe 200 or 100 or, you know, lots of investors and they're passive. So you typically will sit on the board. For instance, you'll have representatives on the board as a private equity firm. So I would say a typical private equity investment will range from a low of maybe 15, 20% all the way to buying complete control of the business. But, you know, firms have been known to do less. I mean, particularly if you're dealing with sizable businesses or to club together, you know. But the important thing is that principle of active investing, of, you know, serving on the governance boards, as well as adding value, right? And the fact that like the private equity or the investment will need an exit, which means that like there has to be some agreement on where the company is going and how it would eventually create liquidity, you know, for the investors. Having said that, everything else really is diverse, right? People specialize because of the nature. Some people specialize by industry, some specialize by geography, some specialize by the investment type, you know, infrastructure versus companies versus debt, and so on and so forth. We started off, you know, doing Nigeria, just trying to master Nigeria, then West Africa, and now we're doing Sub-Saharan Africa, you know, but then doing general private equity across. We've tended to do more growth equity, meaning that we're investing in businesses that are growing because we felt that suited our market. But we also do what they call buyouts or control investments, where you actually take control. You will have management, but then the private equity investors actually own most of the company and will therefore sell it once it's ready for sale to somebody else. Yes.
Thank you very much, okay. Just to pick up on one of the things you said, you focused on governance, and maybe just to elaborate a bit in terms of, because I think we tend to underestimate the importance of governance or how governance translates into better value for an organization. So it would be good for you to talk about that. But also you had things in your presentation that talked about the value addition that PE firms bring beyond governance, and, you know, maybe a bit more practical sharing of what's the value addition as an entrepreneur that I should expect to get from a PE firm beyond the capital.
Yes, so let me start with the governance, because that's important. Now, governance, as you know, deals with the boards and the committees, right? The decision-making bodies or instruments of the business, right? And a typical private equity firm will be involved in those. And there will also be independence, particularly if you get into this code of corporate governance that we now have in Nigeria and other parts of the world. It's not just about the shareholders, of which the private equity firm is one, but it's also about the other stakeholders, you know, including employees and customers, and therefore you're expected to have independent directors and non-executive directors and so on. But from the point of view of the marriage or the partnership with the company or the entrepreneur or other shareholders, you use the board to, I'm sure we all know about, or most of us know about, typical waterfall. The shareholders own the company, and they then vest the management of it in, you know, or they delegate that responsibility to the board. The board delegates it to management, who then manages on behalf of everybody. So the board's role is critical because they are representing the shareholders and the other stakeholders for that matter. And so you would want a board that functions well, that actually takes that oversight role seriously, which means that management is accountable, you know, and responsible. As you know, there is something called the agency problem, which means that, like, if you don't have accountability, you could have a management team that is just managing the company for their own benefit, or employees that are not always representing the interests of the other stakeholders. So it's to do that well that we do. And then you have different committees. And then that then leads into your other question, where the value addition, because first, successful private equity firms bring together knowledge experts, you know, just people who are very knowledgeable, even beyond their own team, right, to serve on those boards. They bring a lot of industry wisdom and knowledge, you know, they invest in industry they understand and where they've built alliances. If you think about successful firms, they've invested, like in our own case, we've invested in over 40 businesses, and we're just here in Africa. If you go global, some of the most successful firms like Blackstone and the names we hear, they've done things all across the world very successfully. So they bring a lot of, should I call it, sort of a treasure trove of wisdom and experience, right, to bear. And you can imagine all that coming to your doorstep. You know, when you're running your business, probably it may not be your first business, but you wouldn't have that amount of experience. And if that experience can be brought to bear, it increases the likelihood of success. Nothing succeeds like success, and you can actually share that success, and everybody's a winner.
Thank you, okay, for that. There's another question that builds on that, and a very simple, straightforward question. What does an investor-ready company look like, especially in the IT sector, especially in the technology sector? So what does an investor-ready company look like?
So I will start by saying that, like, I will start by thinking about both the promoters and the management, right? Just how ready are they? You know, be almost like dealing with the hoop before I deal with the company itself, if you pierce the veil. If you have investors and management that are, like I said, that have both personal and professional integrity, understand what they're trying to do, and are ready for partnership, that's a big part. Now, that should translate typically, even before the private equity firm is coming in, to how they do things around there, right? Do they keep proper records? You know, I mean, it gets back to your field. BC, you should actually answer that question, because it's the kind of typical thing somebody will come to you for. You know, you know, how the company is run professionally. Do they have proper accounts? Do they have proper audits? Do they, you know, pay their taxes? Do they treat their customers well and their employees well? So that you're not dealing with something that is just, you know, very informal, very unstructured, and the people just, you know, ad hoc in terms of how they go about things. And even worse would be where, you know, they're owing all kinds of people, or like there are all kinds of responsibilities that are floating around. So an investor-ready company just means that, like, this company is ready for marriage, right? So you can partner with them, they can enter into agreements, and they will honor the agreements. But you might want to comment on this, BC. I'm sure as a moderator, you might, since this is your field of expertise, what does an investor-ready company look like? Tell us.
No, thanks, okay. You know, and maybe just in simple terms, you touched on it earlier. You know, when you want to do an investment, you line up professional advisors, and you line up professional advisors that help you look at the due diligence and whatever. And, you know, one of the things that had crossed my mind was that as we talk to entrepreneurs, and as you work with entrepreneurs, do you sit on the table, and on the other side of the table, you see the entrepreneur, like you described for ABC, surrounded by advisors who are the most professional advisors? And I think that for me is one of the signs, because the ability to be able to want to work with professional advisors shows that you do want to run this in a professional manner. And I think that's important in terms of what we do. And, you know, you've touched on some of those things. It's as basic as, do I keep accounting records? You know, even if I had a small-time auditor, but have I recorded everything the way I should? Am I open to putting governance structures in place? So I'm not going to repeat some of the things you've said, but I think, you know, the quality of advisors, I think on the side of the entrepreneur, if I was getting a PE firm, has to match the advisors on the side of the PE firm. It's extremely important as you trash out the details of this legal marriage that you're getting into. But let me, you know, because there are lots of questions that, and I think some of the questions really are also focused on ACA. So it's a good opportunity for you, okay, to talk about what you're doing and what your focus is. And one of the questions is, would you be investing, or are you interested in investing in an innovation hub?
So again, the reason I like to answer these questions generally is that I know that the questions are asked not just for the benefit of the person, but for the benefit of the attendees, right? Innovation hubs are very sort of topical and very interesting now. But again, they tend to fit into either people investing in technology or people who are doing, you know, who are trying to create sort of either an ecosystem, you know, or you know, things to support early stage investing, right? Which is not really our forte. I talked about Dr. Mobala Johnson, for instance. You know, she had chosen to be in that space because of her background of technology and venture. And so you'll find that there are people doing that. We have a foundation that in the past used to support some of these early stage things more as a way to give back. But even that, we're looking at it in terms of just trying to make sure we're doing things that are, have greater social impact rather than being specific in dealing with individual companies. We would rather work with, maybe the Economic Summit Group or Lagos Business School, or, something that is basically a facilitator that then helps several players. But I have no doubt that for somebody who wants to float or invest in an innovation hub, they will find takers, because this is one of the areas that actually Nigeria is doing well, which is attracting funding and support for technology and for innovation. Yes.
Thanks, okay. A different type of question, and it's really the use of special purpose vehicles in Nigeria. Do you think that, for PE firms will take advantage of that, especially now that the stock exchange has approved the rules around special purpose vehicles, in terms of the ability to invest in emerging high growth tech sectors? So are you going to see, PE firms in general just take advantage of these new rules?
Yeah, so first, let me again, for the purposes of everybody, define that special purpose vehicles are just, in effect, any company that you set up or any legal entity you set up for just one purpose, right? Just so that you separate the rest of your business from that. And it's a great tool all around the world for getting things done so that you don't clutter it with other things. So SPVs, special purpose vehicles, as we call them, should be the norm, not the exception. So you find that most places that are investor friendly allow you to use SPVs, because what it does is just so that you can, I was in a setting where somebody was trying to raise a bond and they told them use a special purpose vehicle so that the bond can go in there and you make it very clear how you repay it and the investors can look at it and understand it. Not that they have to do a diligence on everything else that is part of your business or your group or conglomerate or whatever. And it's used in a variety of ways. It's like somebody who's building a property and want to bring other investors. The easiest thing to do is to have an SPV that will own that property, and then all the investors will line up there and be the shareholders of that SPV, and then they own this single asset. So I think it's good that it's being allowed more and more in terms of our structures here. And my answer would be, I expect to see, yes, increasing use of SPVs. It's actually a standard tool. It's almost like when SPVs you're not able to use them because of the problem of setting up companies or taxes or legal issues, then it's a handicap. It's a handicap. So other markets, just use them routinely, and I think that's the norm, and that's the way to go.
It's a much cleaner form of investing, if that's
absolutely
to sum it
yes.
up. Now, there's another question around, and I think I'll just ask it in general terms, that is there any rule of thumb in determining what's the appropriate sweat equity that an investor, an entrepreneur should have before they enter into a transaction with a PE or venture capital firm? So what's the right amount of sweat equity? If there's is there a rule of thumb to that?
So there's a principle, which is obviously, as you can imagine, principles will be non-quantitative. So the principle is that, you want the entrepreneur or the sort of shareholders that you're going to back to have real skin in the game, right? Skin in the game in the sense that, if the thing failed, that they will lose something. In fact, you want it to keep them awake at night, right? So that this guy is even more committed to the success of this venture than you, the private equity firm or the venture capitalist. So that's the general principle. Now, when you get into that, how do you then achieve that principle? Sweat equity means that the man has been working on it for a while, and there is equity there that is not by way of cash, but clearly is worth something. And usually it's possible to value that, right? And if it's a new venture, and it's the idea and it's things that are still very, very early, then that sweat equity will be less, but still something. Some of the time it can even be forward looking, where you're setting benchmarks for what the person will get as sweat equity in quotes for sweating looking forward, as opposed to the sweat of the past. All those are fair game, right? But keep in mind that this is a negotiation. The truth is that's why BC was talking about advisors. You need to have good advisors, because also you want to be well advised in going to, this is a negotiation at the end of the day. It's not science to the point that somebody says, this is what you must do. If he tells you that, you can always tell him that every story has two sides. But you can find a fair, you can land at a place that is fair for both sides. But it's a negotiation at the end of the day.
And both parties need to be realistic, if I can add that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's another question around the healthcare environment in Nigeria. Although, the person said due to COVID, but we knew that even before COVID, we didn't have the right health infrastructure in the country. Okay happens to be a medical doctor too in his very early life, so it's a good question for him. But I think the question really is around, are we going to see PE firms being more bullish in terms of investing in the healthcare sector? And we know there's already investment that's gone from PE firms into the healthcare anyway in Nigeria. But maybe the question is around, are you going to see, a bit more bullishness around a sector that requires so much capital?
Good. It's an excellent question. I think that you will see more bullishness or more interest, right, in the social sectors, and I include healthcare there, education there. And the reasons are the following. Number one is that, like, remember that these PE firms, I remember in those days in elementary economics, there's something they call derived demand, where the demand is coming from something else. The demand is somewhat derived, right? So the investors that the PE firms are representing have the things that interest them. So a lot of these institutions, particularly the development finance institutions, are very interested in social sectors right now, right? And COVID has added to it, but by no means, like you said, BC, the only contributing factor, but it's a factor, which means that, like, there is more money available for healthcare spending, and COVID has certainly added to that in a big way. So the short answer is yes, you see more because there's more money available, but there's also more demand for the services available. People are taking their health seriously. I'm told that pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, yeah, it's been very painful, very sad, but these guys are smiling all the way to the bank. They may be sad, but I tell you, not in terms of the business returns, because the way people are, we are behavioral animals, right? So a lot of people now are prepared to spend money on healthcare they were not prepared to do before. Governments are prepared to spend money they were not prepared to do before. The social, the foundations are. So all that money is going into the sector. So even in underwriting the investment or in evaluating the investments, there's a lot more juice, right? There's a lot more, driving it. So I think you can expect more there, yes. The question is, will it be sustained? I hope it is sustained. It won't be like when COVID goes away, people will say the fear is gone.
Yeah. So, I guess one of the value adds is, by getting the PE firms in, it helps to build more sustainable business.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Which is key because it hasn't been. So a question really is, one is that, there's been a lot of investment in the fintech sector, and, you use the pay stack, a lot of headlines around Flutterwave in the last few days. And somebody in the audience is wondering, why aren't we hearing the local PE firms investing in technology? There seems to be a lot of investment coming from offshore, from Silicon Valley.
And the short answer to that is because it's a specialized area. Remember, I talked about people specialize, right? Venture capital as a whole is specialized. So I just use one analogy, one small example to illustrate this. In the more mature investment, when you're investing in later stage businesses, right, you are very concerned about losses because you make some, but you're not going to make 100 times your money, right? In venture investing, they're very concerned about missing out on the unicorn, the next Google or the next, because one Google can cover 1,000 mistakes. So the general principle there is, spread your bread upon the water. Just make sure that you don't miss the next big thing to come out of Nigeria, because it will determine your returns. You can imagine somebody who invested in Google versus somebody who didn't. It doesn't matter anything else they did. One will be, declaring IRR of 100%. The other one is probably lucky to be doing something else. The good news is that in those markets, there are many more. There's not one Google, but there are several unicorns. Unicorns are when they get to $1 billion valuation, these technology companies. So I'm glad that people like Dr. Johnson, but she's by no means the only one. There are several other players, that are investing in it, from early stage to angel investors to. So you will hear more. Is what I would say. You will hear more. Maybe the truth is that the ones you are hearing now are some of the successful ones that started earlier, right? But a lot more money has gone into a lot more, and I pray many more of them will succeed and will make the news as well. And then you'll find that it will also draw capital in here. The more success stories we have, the more capital is available, and the more you can then have the people to manage the capital. We have a lot of Nigerians in diaspora who are experts in this area, who are ready to come back and to invest here if the capital is available to invest, yes. And of course, the pension funds and other sources of capital will also have to be willing to put money in that space.
I think, thanks, okay. I think talking about, we hear the headlines and we just look at one transaction, that we need to take the big picture and understand, what are the motives. Now, you had touched on this earlier, but I guess there's a question, so you might want to do a deep dive on it. And the question is around, when trust breaks down, what happens? How does the PE firm manage it? And how do they exit? And really, if there's a breakdown of trust, should they really exit?
It's a great question. So I would say that I will start from where I started earlier, which is from a PE standpoint and from the entrepreneur standpoint, the first thing you should look for is integrity. And why do you look for integrity? People who have integrity, even if trust breaks down, they will honor the agreement, right? If you have an agreement with somebody signed, and let's say you don't like the person anymore, the person offends you, honorable people won't walk away and say, I don't like your face anymore, and tear out the agreement and go away. So it helps when people are willing to honor agreement. It also helps when the system has property rights, right? And is willing to honor agreements, because it's a very important ecosystem for attracting capital, because people don't want a situation where if something goes wrong, like you said, trust breaks down, and then the sort of mercy almost of the other person, or whether the person will act responsibly or not. And then the other thing I should also say is that, like I mentioned it tangentially earlier, that usually there are other people that can act as honest brokers, what they call them again, when people are trying to help settle quarrels, that can come into the picture. People that both sides are willing to respect, and maybe they can come and act as some kind of I don't want to call them arbitrators or whatever, but the intermediaries, and somebody said intermediaries, yes, just to help to create an atmosphere for a decision to be made, or for the parties to be able to find a way to work together. Because usually, if you think win-win, even in that situation, remember that thing, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Because what happens if they can't agree is that the company then suffers and everybody loses. And people should be mature enough to say, yes, we may not agree, but we still have something at stake. Can we agree to at least make this thing work, and then figure out how to share it going forward? And even if it requires, of course, as you know, in extreme cases, people also go to court and use, somebody used the word mediators. That's probably the more appropriate word. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, okay. So another question is that, and I'm assuming this is on the mind of several people, is that, PE firms are obviously, by the nature of the fact that it's a fiduciary role, as you've explained, and you then have to deliver, both deliver back the investment and returns to the people who have given you money to manage. The question is that, PE firms seem to be focused on improving the valuation prior to exits. And if the focus is just on improving valuation, what about the other issues that are, what's the focus, what's the downside in terms of the focus is just on the items to improve valuation and not necessarily, so how do you strike the balance between improving the valuation and the long-term needs of the organization after the exit of the PE firm? That's the question.
Thank you, BC. I think the starting point is, if you are dealing with real valuation, right, the way we know it, as you know, valuation, for those of you that are familiar with valuation, would know that valuation comes from the future value, not the past, right? So there should actually be some measure of alignment there. You should be building an institution, because institutions are more valuable than things that, if the people were to go away, wouldn't have any value. Again, to go back to our mentor, Dick Creamer, Dick always asks the question, how come there are no third generation family businesses in Nigeria? Because they're not institutionalized, right? So when the entrepreneurs or the founders or the families go away, the business goes away. And therefore, the value is actually very little. So I think for PE firms that are sophisticated or that are wise, as well as for management teams that are wise and entrepreneurs that are wise, they know that you have to be holistic in thinking about this. It's not just a financials. It's the people, the quality of the people, it's the values of the company, it's the professionalism, it's the way they treat their customers, it's the brand equity. All those things go into the value of the company and what you can get. But it goes even further than that. That in the new world we now live in, there is this concept of, just impact investing, which means that like it's not just about financial returns; it's also about social returns, right? The double bottom line. Some even talk about triple bottom line, where what's good for the company, return in terms of social capital, like how many jobs are you creating, how are you helping society, the environment, and so on and so forth. And we find that the investors who are backing us as private equity firms are increasingly looking for those as well. So those things are not incompatible. I would argue actually that like it is better to run the company in a way that will achieve both, not either or. You don't want a company that, because when a company doesn't make money, it's not sustainable. It will go away if it's making losses or not doing well enough. But also if it's just making money at the expense of its employees or at the expense of the environment, it will also go away or get into trouble.
Okay, so just one last question, because we've run out of time, but I think, we can take this one last question. And the focus really is that just given that, MSMEs and SMEs, they are the significant part of our economy and they are the greatest employer of labor. And I know you know that well, is that what really is that? Do you have any perspectives of how we can scale up the role of PE firms to be able to work with entrepreneurs and to also create a sustainable growth platform? So the question is, really, how do you scale up the role of PE firms in the economy and in the impact that you make? Okay,
but let me tie it back to the MSME things, as micro, small, and medium enterprises where you started from. I think the way to think about investing is think about it as a spectrum that starts from like the individual, the entrepreneur who puts in his own capital, and then he goes to family and friends, and at times people add fools or people who will support him, even if it's not logical to do so at that point, and then, you have angel investors, right? Where they, at times they are crowdfunding, where they, and then you start getting into venture capital, Series A, Series B, Series 1, Series 2, and so on. And then eventually you get into growth investing or development capital investing. Then you get into private equity. Then you get into more mature buyouts, right, where businesses are now being sold, because their cash flow is steady and predictable, and you can borrow against those cash flows to buy the business from the previous owners and then own it for a season. So that spectrum, I mentioned it only because at that very early stage, everybody's fair game, right? Everybody has a family, friends, and people who may trust them. And you find a lot of people, that's still what they do. What happens in more sophisticated societies or more where the enabling environment is there is that an atmosphere is created where there are more and more monies or more and more funds available, right? So you find a Bank of Industry, for instance, has money for MSMEs. When we're in government, because of the ministry I covered, which was industry, trade, and investment, we actually felt MSMEs were a major sort of responsibility for us, right? So in fact, we had a department that's focused on it, as well as SMEDAN, Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, that was focused on it. I know we try to work with Lagos Business Schools. So the thing I find that is the issue, but if you bring it nearer home, there's just a lot of talk on all sides, right? If we did have as much as we talked, our MSMEs would get a lot more help. One of the things I was very focused on was this whole enabling environment, because they benefit disproportionately when you make it easier to do business. They also suffer disproportionately when it's hard to do business, when you have to bring your own power, and when, the taxman is harassing you and, you have all kinds of issues. All those things affect them disproportionately. So a society that is more sort of caring, frankly, will just eliminate some of those bottlenecks, because then you grow your economy. Because like you said, you're talking about, majority of businesses and so that's something I think is still an unfinished business for all of us to think about. And I know you also did a lot of work for smaller businesses as part of your practice, BC, back in the day, as they say.
Thanks, okay. Back in the day. But we need to sort of round up now. But in rounding up, okay said a lot of things. But, one thing I would just want to emphasize, because I think it's important and we underestimate the impact that has on this marriage or partnership of an entrepreneur who needs capital, beyond capital, needs value addition to, as a catalyst to grow their business. And the PE firm, and the point you made, okay, which I think is so important, is around integrity. And integrity is not just personal integrity, it's professional integrity. I think it's extremely important. And we can't sort of overemphasize this and say that it's extremely important. As okay knows, he's quoted Dick a number of times. And I think, for me, Dick always used to tell us, Nigeria is no different. Water is not going to run up a hill. It doesn't work like that anywhere else. So I think as we all try and create these businesses and want to grow the economy, it's important that we're doing it on the basis of what I would call universal foundations or sustainable foundations. So integrity, strong governance, keeping proper records of the business, and the ability to, just leverage the environment. I think some of those things are extremely important. So thank you very much, Foke. You've said much more than I've summarized, but I thought, those are the things that I thought, are important to talk about. So I'll just hand it over back to Akin, and, thanks to Oke.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Bimbola Shureye. First of all, is to thank everybody for being part of this. On behalf of the Chamber, first of all, I'd like to thank our keynote speaker. I'll say welcome back to this side of the divide, Dr. Oke Enemwala, the Chairman of African Capital Alliance. I think BC took one thing from me. I was going to bring up this whole issue of bringing professional integrity to bear. That was one takeaway I was going to go away with that. We are not emphasizing that enough. It's okay to have personal integrity, but issue of professional integrity is key. You also made a point about learning from experiences. I think it is quite key, and that's the advantage PE firms bring to bear. And it's always good to be upfront about the issues and discuss them beforehand. So it's really to thank you very much, Dr. Oke, for being part of this. I'm quite privileged to give the vote of thanks on this because it appears to be a panel of accountants. We all go back a long way from the accounting profession. And it's on that note, I also give a big shout out to BC Lamikora to thank you for moderating this particular session. Clearly, your experience in KPMG as a partner is also come up to bear. So thank you very much to Dr. Oke and BC Lamikora for being part of this. Obviously, we cannot have a program like this without our sponsors. And it's a big thank you to Pay Attitude, Hope, PS Bank, Kairos Capital, Codros Capital, and Afri Invest. Thank you very much for supporting us. I must also remember our patrons and council members who are always there for us, who have been the backbone of the chamber. And for attendees, I think last time I checked, I looked at the Q&A, even though you've answered so many questions, I can see we still have about 10 open questions left unanswered. I will encourage the questions to be there. We'll try and see if we can get Dr. Oke to give an answer, which we can share with everybody. I must thank all the attendees for the quality of the comments and the questions that they did ask. So it is quite good. Our programs committee, headed by another fellow accountant, Aki Oshutoki. Thank you for bringing together another wonderful event. I must thank you and your members. Secretariat, headed by the DG. Thank you for what you're doing. And I must thank you for each free program. It's been quite wonderful how things have worked. We have our upcoming programs for the rest of this month. I think even from next month, I think the first one I'll talk about is a digital marketing masterclass, which is coming up on the 6th and 7th of April. That is Tuesday and Wednesday. And that is in partnership with Digital Marketing Skill Institute. That is a 2-day webinar, 10 to 12 on each day. And we'll encourage everybody to be part and parcel of that. After that comes our golf tournament at MBCC. It's not just about webinars, it's also about networking. So we have a wonderful networking opportunity coming up on the 16th of April, Friday, where we have our golf tournament being held at Igoi Golf Club. People are quite free to join us on that particular day. And after that, we have our technology and innovation seminar, which is coming up on April the 21st. And we have the MD of First Bank, Dr. Adeshola Adetuton, who will be taking us on that. And it will be moderated by Mrs. Kofo Akikugbe, the MD of Secure ID Limited. Like I said, we'll be talking technology, we'll be talking innovation. And we're quite pleased to have two people who are at the forefront of technology and innovation in our own environment. Once you are succeeding there, you now start talking about strategic leadership and succession planning. And I'm quite pleased, even this goes hand in hand with what our guest speaker was talking about today, that you bring in PE firms where you now look at sustainability and how do you create firms that will at least outlive the people that started the business. So we have a strategic leadership and succession planning program coming up on Tuesday 20th and Wednesday 21st of April, 10 a.m. to 12:30. And that's in partnership with Weavers Consult. And that'll be moderated and facilitated by Mr. Sheyi Adeyemi. That's coming up on the 20th and 21st of April, strategic leadership and succession planning. So join us on that. If you are interested in becoming a member of the chamber, you can please contact Osareme Okwe, a membership officer at soremeokwe@mbcc.org.ng. It's on the screen right now. You can also visit our website, www.mbcc.org.ng. Finally, follow us on social media to be informed on all our activities. We are there on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We are there on Twitter, and you can also reach us on YouTube. You can see all our videos on YouTube, and our telephone number is up there. So thank everybody for being part of this particular webinar. And again, I must end by thanking Dr. Oke Enelama and Bisilami Kora for being part of this wonderful webinar titled Managing Private Equity and the Entrepreneurial Relationship, the Key Imperatives. I'm quite glad and I'm quite hopeful that you all took something away from this particular one. So until we see you at our next offering, which is Digital Marketing Masterclass on Tuesday, April 6th, on behalf of the President, Mr. Karide Falowo, and other members of the Chamber, I thank you very much for being part of this. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Cheers.